Yes, so here we are, the F word. Understanding what the words translated fornication and also harlotry in the Bible actually mean. Most of us think we have a pretty good idea of it. Most of us are wrong, though, especially if you attend, like I say, one of these uber holy churches, like our friend Jesse Morell's. So let's get the definition of the word in English first, though, and we'll see it's pretty close to what Jesse Morell calls it. Consensual sexual intercourse between two persons not married to each other. So, yeah, Jesse Morell is correct when he says fornication is premarital intercourse. The problem with that is the Bible doesn't talk about premarital intercourse. The Bible talks about the use of prostitutes. I'll show you what I'm talking about. First, though, let's make sure we know that this word that gets translated fornication in our English Bibles, it's not talking about adultery. Let me show you. Okay, so the koine noun translated into the English word adultery is moikia. And there are other related nouns to this. And it is different than fornication. Jesus himself distinguishes between adulteries and fornications in Matthew 15:19 and Mark 7:21. Interestingly, though, we only have in the New Testament, we only have three occurrences of this word adultery. So apparently it was not a very big problem, was it? I mean, Jesus mentions it once, and I'm not sure what the other occurrence is. I think it's in, yes, that's right. It's in John chapter 8, the woman who was taken in adultery. John 7:53 to 8:11. The woman who was taken in adultery, they were about to stone her, and Jesus says, well, let the one who has never committed sin cast the first stone. Between that and the one usage of Jesus's during the Sermon on the Mount, that's the entire discussion of adultery in the New Testament. Apparently, it was not that big of a deal, and, or I should say, not that big of a concern. We don't see in the epistles warning us about adultery. They warn us about fornication, but not about adultery. And I would add the story of the woman taken in adultery in John is an interpolation. It's not part of the original gospel. New Testament scholars are reasonably certain about that. In any case, let's move on to the word that we are concerned with today, which is fornication. And I'll take you to the noun here. And this is Strong's G4202. And let's go down to the usage here. Fornication, whoredom, metaphor, idolatry. This word occurs 25 times in the New Testament, this noun, and 7 times in the book of Revelation alone. And it occurs 46 times in 39 verses in the Septuagint, the 70. Now, the Septuagint, for those of you who are not following this too closely, that is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures done between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. And it was the scriptures that Jesus and the Apostle Paul used. And anyone who's doing a original word study of the Koine in the New Testament, like we are here today, we're looking at porneia, G4202. If you're looking up one of the original Koine words in the New Testament to study its uses, you need to also search the Septuagint, the 70, because again, this is the Greek Testament, Greek translation of the Old Testament, the old original Hebrew scriptures. It's called the 70 because the legend has it 70 translators all came up with the same results. In any case, that's how it gets its name, the 70. But if you are doing a Koine word study, you need to check the 70. You need to check the Septuagint, because that word is going to appear too, as we see here. It occurs 25 times in the New Testament, porneia, from which we also, as you can imagine, get the word pornography. That's the root word of it, porn, porneia. This is the noun. It occurs 25 times in the New Testament, 46 times in the Old Testament. Okay, now, this is something I noticed in my study. You can check it out yourself. But in many New Testament occurrences, it is not at all clear whether illicit sexual activity or idolatry is being discussed. You can make an argument for both in many cases. For example, in Acts 15:20, where they're giving the word to the Gentiles to avoid fornication. Well, in the context there, they might very well be talking about avoiding idolatry as much as they would be talking about avoiding sex with prostitutes. So that's not at all clear. And interestingly, in the 70, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures, this word occurs in 39 different verses, this noun, porneia, which gets translated fornication, okay? This occurs in 39 different verses, and in 38 of those 39, it's talking about idolatry. It's not talking about illicit sexual activity at all. Look it up yourself. Porneia in the 70. Let's go to the verb, 4203, porneo, or pornuo. And this is translated again, fornication, but there is another metaphor to it, which arguably is not a metaphor. It's the real meaning. It's another denotation, which is the practice of idolatry. But this is not talking about this word pornuo, the verb here. This is not talking about premarital sex either. This is talking about the use of prostitutes. This is what it's talking about 5 times in the book of Revelation. Okay, so this verb occurs a total of 7 times in the New Testament. The only time I see that it's talking about illicit sexual activity is in 1 Corinthians 6:18. 1 Corinthians 10:8, it looks like it's talking about idolatry to me. And the other 5 times it appears in Revelation, it is talking about idolatry. It's not talking about illicit sexual activity, premarital intercourse. It's not what it's talking about. It's talking about idolatry. It occurs 18 times in the 7. All right. And again, in most cases, the vast majority of all these cases, idolatry is the issue, not illicit sexual activity. Let's go to this last word here, which is translated in our New Testament as fornication and harlotry, which is porne. 4204, it's another noun. It is the word that gets translated harlot or prostitute in the modern English translation. Okay, that's what it means. It's a prostitute. This occurs 12 times in the New Testament, 5 times in Revelation alone, 37 times in 35 verses in the 70. Okay, so again, some of the New Testament uses of porne are really unclear. We're not sure when Jesus talks about the harlots will go into heaven before you Pharisees. We're not sure if these harlots, these prostitutes, are people who worship other gods, or whether they're women who are selling their favors, sexual favors. But it's just not, you cannot wax dogmatic about it. All 5 uses in Revelation clearly are talking about idolatry, and it's not talking about selling sexual favors, and it certainly isn't talking about casual romances before marriage. All right, so in the 70, however, this noun, porne, is talking about sexual prostitutes very often. But it's also talking about spiritual promiscuity, not just sexual promiscuity with prostitutes. All right, one last slide here. And this is about temple prostitutes in the New Testament area. And a lot of scholars believe that Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is telling the church, telling the men there, don't get involved with temple prostitutes, because it was believed, for one reason, from this writer of the first century, that temples, pagan temples, were filled with prostitutes, both male and female. And so when Paul says, do not be united with a prostitute, he's also warning about demon infestation. He's not just talking about degrading yourself, he's talking about the danger of these foreign gods, these demons, uniting with you. So again, here, this is from the Greek travel writer Strabo. He says the sanctuary of Aphrodite was so rich that it had more than 1,000 female sacred servants. And this sacred servants, I should add, is something of a euphemism. Courtesans whom both men and women used to dedicate to the goddess. So it's not entirely clear. There's a lot of this debate between New Testament scholars, ancient Near Eastern scholars, how much prostitution was actually conducted at these pagan temples back then. But Paul was clearly decrying the use of prostitutes, whether he believed that this was a avenue for demon infestation, or he simply believed it was unbecoming of someone who names Jesus as their Lord. We can't be 100% sure. We can't wax dogmatic. What's clear, though, is he's not talking about romances of the sort that we're going to have on the college campuses. Let me put this down for a moment. We have a tendency to read this word anachronistically. All right. First thing you have to remember, Paul is writing 2,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, Greco-Roman culture, Palestinian culture. Women of the first century are not the equals of men, not then and arguably not now. You didn't romance women in the first century Palestine like you would here in the West in the 21st century. It would get you killed. You wanted to have a woman, you either bartered for her with her oldest male relative, or you went to the local temple and made a deal with the prostitute there. All right. But you certainly didn't romance women like we do here. They weren't going out clubbing like we are here. Okay. They weren't doing any hookups back in first century Palestine. So this word fornication is talking about prostitution and it's talking about idolatry. So what Jesse Morrell was haranguing everyone there for did not exist back then. Okay, so this word that we've been hitting each other over the head with for the last 500 years, turns out has nothing to do with what we thought it had to do with. You have people like Jesse Morrell who are going to tell you this word means any and every type of premarital intercourse. No, it's talking about the use of prostitutes. Prostitutes. Because, again, there were no affairs back then. You didn't romance women back then. Women were not your equals. Okay? They weren't like sitting at the club there deciding which one would be the best to go home with that night. Didn't work that way. So we are reading this we're reading this anachronistically, out of our own time, out of our own culture. And we are reading our culture into theirs, not there. All right, so there are many reasons. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here trying to advocate that it's okay to have lots of premarital relationships including our intercourse. I'm not here to argue that. We have many good reasons to abstain from that, including demonic infestation. There is the two become one flesh principle. And if you are hooking up with someone who is demon infested, you're going to be demon infested too. We have lots of good reasons to wait till marriage. But we cannot read our ideas back into the scriptures. There are lots of good reasons to abstain from premarital sex, but you can't point to the scriptures and pull one out with this word fornication, not honestly anyway, because that's talking about use of prostitutes. It's not talking about illicit romances that went too far. And I'll tell you something else, some of the damage that has been done here. We have couples in the West who are long-term monogamous relationships, cohabiting, okay, who never went to the courthouse, never went to the clerk, got a marriage license, never finalized the thing, but they've been living together for years, sometimes many years, in long-term monogamous sexual relationships. Well, these people are not fornicating, Jesse. No, they're not being promiscuous. They're not using prostitutes. They are, for all intents and purposes, married. Don't call them fornicators. That's not what Paul would have called them. It's not what Jesus would have called them. Don't try to out-holy Jesus and Paul, because you wouldn't know the Holy Ghost from the ghost of Christmas past. Okay? That is not going to win you any converts, and it shouldn't, because it's untrue. It's not what the original Koine words, that original porneia family means. Not the verb, not the noun. It was never talking about just premarital sex. It was always talking about harlotry. It was more often than not talking about idolatry. So yes, we have lots of good reasons to abstain from intercourse before marriage. You just can't pull the Bible out, wave it around, and say, it's in the Bible here. It isn't, because Paul's original readers would not have known what he was talking about or what we're talking about. It was not a concern for them. It was not in their culture. Again, you didn't romance a woman. You couldn't. They'd kill you. They still will. So it didn't work that way. Stop trying to out-holy the original Bible speakers and writers.